Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. My co-hosts for today's show are Joyce Scatchenberger and Janet Corsi. Our guests are Dana Satterwhite and Joseph Watson. And the topic of the show is writing an illustrated book. We're going to read a few fun quotes first, and Joseph, I'm going to let you start.
Okay. Every book is a children's book if he can read. Mitch Hedberg.
Okay.
If writers were good businessmen, they'd have too much good sense to be writers. And that's Irving Cobb.
And Joyce.
Yes, as adults, we've seen so much before that we've often turned the pages of a picture book without really looking. Young children tend to look more carefully. That's Anthony Brown.
And that's true. I mean, you probably both have read to children, or have you, Dana?
Oh, definitely.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they'll ask so many questions. They see things in a book we didn't even put there.
Yeah.
That's true.
And Dana, I'm going to let you read the next one.
Illustrations can be a big window, a looking glass into the author's imagination. That's Tony de Terlizzi.
And that is so true, too. I mean, thank goodness for people like Joseph.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Right.
And Jan, I'm going to let you introduce our first guest.
I'd be delighted to. Our first guest is Dana Satterwhite. Author Dana Satterwhite is an award-winning advertising creative born in Manhattan and raised just outside the city. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from SUNY Birmingham. He pursued graphic design for 2 years in a small studio and studied at the School of Visual Arts, where he discovered a love and affinity. I get it. I guess if I can write, I should learn how to read, huh? For advertising. He did his graduate study at Emerson College in Boston, which led to a career as art director, copywriter, and creative director. Wow, what inspired you to start writing children's stories?
That's a good question. I love kids, and I love inspiring kids, and I find kids incredibly inspiring. So there's an event that takes place every year in Nevada called Nevada Reading Week. I don't know if you guys are familiar. So I would say, got to go back in the archives a little bit. I think it was probably 2008, 2009. My wife and I went to a school called Hickey Elementary School in Vegas. And there was a teacher there named Judy Wadley who, it was either second or third grade, I can't remember. But we went to her class and my wife read to the kids and I had my camera with me. So I took photographs and I just remember them being so engaged. You know, the kids were just so engaged, not with anything that we were necessarily doing, but with the fact that we were there, you know, and it just having some presence in the room just made these kids kind of light up. And that really kind of struck a chord with me. And I thought to myself, you know, I would really like to come back and do this again a lot and have it be something that I'd actually written.
Oh, yeah.
Dana, I have a question for you. Where are you today? Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you guys from Houston.
So you moved to Houston from Las Vegas?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how long were you in Las Vegas?
About 8.5 years.
Oh, okay. All right. So you probably know a few of the people here in the arts community.
Yeah, just a handful.
All right. All right. And Joyce, I'm going to let you introduce our next guest.
Certainly. And again, I'm glad to have both of you here today. Our next guest is Joseph Watson. Joseph is an award-winning painter, illustrator, and conceptual artist whose urban fine art style is unmistakable. A native of Gardena, California, just south of Los Angeles, he found himself surrounded by many non-traditional forms of art at an early age. Watson was in the middle of a commercial art program at Los Angeles Trade Technical College when he was accepted into the prestigious Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. He went on to freelance as a conceptual designer for Mattel, and then spent 5 years in the video game industry, ultimately ending up in Las Vegas, where he splits his time between designing video games, running his own art gallery, painting and illustrating anything you can imagine. His paintings are collected locally, internationally, and resides permanently in a collection as esteemed as Cirque du Soleil, headquarters in Montreal, Canada, and beyond. His work may be seen at the Joseph Watson Collection, online and within Las Vegas, one and only arts factory. Joseph, what else can you tell us about who you are?
All right. So I like to think of myself as a sponge of life, I guess you can say. I like to take all of those experiences, both from good and bad, from all over, and just reinterpret it into my own way. And, something that's visually engaging and sharing that with viewers with the purpose of changing lives for the better. So it's just one of those things where, you're taking a gift and just like producing something that's very attractive and intriguing to kids, adults, and it's a good thing, especially in children's books. Teaming up with a writer such as Dana, reading the amazing work that he wrote and just coming up with visuals to back that up. The magic happens like when solid illustration is paired with solid writing. The end product of that is a very cool thing.
Well, obviously so. I found something on the internet. I read it. It's real short here because you're talking about your collaboration. And the heading of this is, how did it happen? Pretty much like this. It says, I visited Hickey Elementary School in Northeast Las Vegas, got inspired, went home, wrote a story, tried the traditional publishing route, looked promising for a bit, but ultimately didn't turn out. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Met Joseph Watson. Loved his work. Had been partnering ever since. The last 5 years have been spent creating and developing a local following. Now it's time to turn the corner.
And I want to ask you, Dana, did you write anything before you had started the Greta series?
In the children's book space, no, I had not.
Okay, but had you written anything other than children's stories?
Writing commercials and advertising writing.
All right, that's writing.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about for you, Joseph? Have you written anything or just illustrations?
Mainly illustration.
Okay.
I do, however, put like small backstories to my fine art stuff, just as a backbone to it. But as far as in the children's book world, no. Illustration-wise, I've done like small projects, but Greta is really the first one that I grasped my claws onto and just really, sunk everything I had into that project.
Because, I know, Dana, you have an arts background. Why did you choose to find someone to illustrate for you?
I consider myself creative and artistic, but I just think, Watson is next level.
Okay, that's a good answer.
That's great.
Well, you have to know what your limits are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I have a friend who actually, came to me and said the same thing. She's like, "Oh, why don't you just illustrate?" And I was like, I could do that. I just don't know if it's necessarily the best solution, because he's just an immense talent, and not only that, just such a gentleman to work with. It's just, and I also think that in the collaborative process, things, they start off as one thing, but when you begin working as a team or in a partnership, different things can unveil themselves along the way and make the end product better, stronger, more appealing. So I was happy to work with him in a heartbeat.
And I would like to ask you this as well. Like when you passed this off to Joseph, Joseph, did you give him like sketches or a storyboard of some kind, or because I went to your website.
I think there was some early. I think there was maybe a handful of like things that I just drawn out, but not. It wasn't storyboarded at all. It was more or less clean slate. I just wanted him to read the words and sit with it for a bit and see what he thought. And then he came back to me with, his first round, and it was great. He's just, the way he wraps his head around projects to me is just incredible. So
Joseph, do you find it easier to work with someone when they give you sketches, or would you prefer to go out with your own ideas or concepts?
If the person I'm working with has a really strong understanding on how it all works visually, the mechanics of building something, excuse me, solid, I have more trust in that. But if it's a writer that can do that with words alone,
Mm-hmm.
that's enough. So basically, when I read the original manuscripts for the Greta projects, from the words alone, I knew right away that, okay, I could see something in my head because it just worked so well.
Mm-hmm. Because I wrote a children's story as well. In fact, Jan's daughter-in-law is the one who did the illustrations for my book.
Okay.
And it's interesting because that was the first time I had taken a book. Well, it wasn't the first time I had hired an illustrator, but, to go through that whole process. And I found it difficult in the past finding the right person who understands the voice. And that we clicked in that Veronica really understood what I was trying to accomplish with the book. I'm kind of like Dana. I had a little arts background, so I did my original sketch. But then when she put pen to paper, it was completely different. It was so much better. But we really didn't, other than a few sketches, she was able to grasp the idea and go from there. And so I really prefer to work that way.
Oh, right, definitely.
Yeah.
It's cool with good writing. It's almost like the writer's painting with words, and I think the person reading should be able to paint that picture in their head as well. But when you have those illustrations to back it up, it's great.
Well, that's what captures the children's attention. It truly is. I mean, I'm the author, and I felt great that what I wrote, but at the same time, without that illustrator, it wouldn't be really the same. It wouldn't be the same story because the illustrations bring the story to life in the eyes of a child. It really does.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dana.
No, I was just nodding in agreement.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask you both because I know that Lisa Loeb was the narrator for the Go-Go Greta, the first book, when it was an iPad.
Yes.
How did that come about? Dana?
So, yeah, I'll field that one. So so Vegas is a very tight knit community. A friend of mine approached me and actually just mentioning Greta to another friend of his, and they were actually looking to start a children's book content app, or like a publishing company. For several different children's properties, and they had kind of heard about Greta through a couple of folks, and they thought it would be a nice property to add to their portfolio. So our friends Angela Abshir and John McLean, they started an app development company called Gabby Duck, and they brought on Greta as one of the properties in their initial what they were pursuing as their initial launch. And Angela actually has deep ties in the music industry.
Okay.
And she finds herself, at the Grammys, I think probably every year, and she's got ties to Nashville. So she was like, "Hey, so we need somebody to be the voice of Greta." And I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And she's like, "How about Lisa Loeb?" And we were like, "You mean like the Lisa Loeb?" And she's like, "Yeah." So she's like, "I know somebody who knows somebody." So she kind of chased down that path a little bit. And I think for Joseph and myself, I think we were like, that'd be great. But I mean, what are the odds? And then I remember her specifically giving me a phone call on her way home from LA. This one, I don't remember what day of the week it was, but she called me up and she's like, "So, talk to Lisa." And we're like, "Okay." And she's like, and yeah, she's in. And I was just like,
Oh,
Wonderful.
The networking. Networking's so important. It really is. And you never know who you're going to be networking with. That's the amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it kind of went like that. And, it was just knowing people and people who were willing to take a chance on, something that we had come up with. So
I think that's what's fascinating about life. Behind Joyce's head is a poster. And Joyce, you were on this show. And we had a lady, Carla Masterson, who lives in Las Vegas as well, and she's a children's author as well. And Carla goes skipping down the hallway to come into the studio with Joyce there. And Jen, you were on that show as well.
Yes.
And she's skipping to the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road.
Follow the yellow brick
And
road.
when she entered the office, she saw this poster behind them that's by Melanie Taylor Kent. And she goes, I know her.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, Melanie Taylor Kent is the person who convinced her to become a children's writer
Okay.
Yeah.
or author. And then she actually did the illustrations for her. And then as it goes full circle, now her son, who is also a children's author, is going to be on this show as well in a couple of weeks. So it's amazing how the connections work and how it all goes full circle in life, even, you know. But it was so funny because she's skipping down the hall, follow
Yeah.
the yellow brick road.
Yeah. And there it is, right under
Right.
her.
Yeah.
All right, guys, how did you bring this brand new character to life? I'm just curious. Where did the idea come from for Go-Go Greta?
So, you want me to lead this off?
What's up, man? No, you
Okay.
go ahead.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, from an illustrator's perspective, so when I met Dana on this project, he really just pushed the idea of having this being based on his daughter Shay.
Okay.
Oh.
So it was a few important things, little aspects that we wanted to keep in mind with designing the character. One was to just make it universally appealing as possible, having it a very positive role model, you know, a girl who can achieve any dream out there. But also, if little boys saw the character as well, we wanted them to relate to the story. So I kicked it off with a bunch of initial ideations of character development. So just many very different variants of the same character: glasses, no glasses, tall, thin, small. And I would shoot emails back and forth with Dana. It was kind of like a tennis match, kind of a creative tennis match. So Dana would say, "All right,
Go ahead.
I like the glasses from number 2, but I like the shoes from number 4 and 6." Hence the 2 different kinds of shoes. So it was kind of like a Frankenstein of the best qualities of the character that matched the story. So we came up with something very appealing, and also the color scheme and settings for the character and for the world to take place. That was assembled and just thought out by like both of us, just sending emails back and forth, and voila, book number 1. So that's the look of book number 1 is.
Now,
Yeah,
Dana, you
right.
were living here, though, at the time when the book first came out?
I was, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So was it easier to get together and collaborate that way, or emails? Or you had mentioned emails. Because I've actually had authors on the show when they collaborate with novels. I had 2 authors who didn't meet till they came to the show
Right.
in 7 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they collaborated for
one
7
was on
years.
the East Coast and one was here. And well, actually, one was in Arizona and one was on the East Coast. And then when they came to Las Vegas to be on the show, that was really the first time
they'd
they had
ever met. Yeah.
We did all those coffee shop and Whole Foods market meetings and stuff like that, just because there's a lot of creative energy that can also be exchanged in person that you can't really
Right.
get in email. So
Good point.
yeah, things could be misinterpreted as well in email. Plus, you can get a lot further, like in person. I think, from my perspective, from an illustrator at least. So there was like both actually.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. There's a ton of emails going back and forth for a long time. But when we could meet in person, we would definitely try and make that a priority. Because I agree with Joseph. It's the energy. I think it's just the just that forum of being right there face to face just kind of helps things along.
I feel that way today. I think with the technology the way it is today, sometimes we forget that being there in person is really important. It's kind of like when someone wants to be on the show or someone wants to communicate with me about something else. I usually get text messages or emails, and I'll end up calling them, and they're like puzzled that I called them.
Yes.
But I really want that one-on-one experience with them, and I really like to communicate. I've dealt with a lot of PR people in the past, and a couple of people didn't understand why I needed to talk to the author, or in your case, the illustrator.
Right.
Right.
But understanding where you're coming from is important when you're doing a show like this anyway. I need to have some idea of what your personality is like and where you're coming from so we can bring that out in the show. And we've lost that in today's society with technology, I think. And kids today, they'd rather text you any day, in any minute of the day, rather than
Yes.
call you. They do not want a phone call.
I have
Right.
a question here about the actual picture itself. I know it's Go-Go Greta, and I know you said you've worked on this for a while. What was the choice for a little girl, maybe as opposed to a little boy? What was that about?
So basically, Dana's daughter, Shay.
Yes.
Did you
She's-
meet Shay before you
Oh.
started the illustration?
I
Well-
did actually. I remember when your wife was pregnant with Shay when you guys first walked into the gallery. So I met her before she was.
Even born.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there
Yeah.
is a long personal history too here.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Oh, okay. So you knew her. You knew what her kind of ideas were and her physiology and her psychology and all of that. You were part of Greta. Greta was part of you.
Well, yeah. So based on the criteria and the bullet points that Dana wanted to express with the visuals of the character, he was built around Shay, basically.
I see. I
Uh-huh.
see. I'm sure getting something personal like that gives you more inspiration.
Oh, most definitely. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, certainly.
Good.
It's kind of like meeting someone in person again. You know, you
Yes.
get that
Yeah, that
energy
phone
and that
call,
feel for
yes.
what it's about.
Yes.
How many books do you have planned for the series, Dana?
For right now, we're 3 from the basic, the initial manuscript. I think there are a couple of additional stories that we have kind of working right now. I don't really think that there's a limit. I think it's whatever Joseph's bandwidth will allow. Oftentimes has something to do with it, but I think the way we set it up, the refrain in the book is "I can do anything, I can do it all," and I think that just lends itself to infinite solutions, infinite possibilities. I think that's a big thing for kids. Just sort of getting that message out that you can accomplish whatever you set your mind to. So I don't know if there's a finite number we'd attach to it. I think it's just whatever our schedules allow, basically. And if it becomes a wildly popular global sensation, there's definitely no limit to what we're willing to do.
Great. One of the things I find when I'm writing, especially a children's story, is that I know, Dana, this is probably true for you. I have what I want on paper in mind. I mean, like I said, I can't always express it. That's why we get an illustrator like Joseph. But when I'm writing, I actually visualize the story in my mind all the way through. I just wish that I could do it, but and that sometimes that can be difficult for some authors to express, not just with words, but even verbally when you meet someone. This is what I'm looking for, or this is how I'd like this to be, drawn out.
You're so right about that, because I think there's also, with the right illustrator, I think they have the ability to almost read the mind of the writer and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So the writer being able to read the mind of the illustrator and their capabilities to produce the right imagery to tell that story with that particular book. And I think on the illustrator side, they should do that same thing as well. So they should be able to learn that writer and almost think how they think. So there's minimal rework and just the maximum amount of visual magic that can occur with that book.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you just hit on is it's sometimes very difficult to understand exactly what the author is trying to get across. And when we write anything, whether it's Joyce or Jan or myself or Dana, we usually have some kind of agenda, I guess you could say, in mind. There's some subliminal message we're trying to send out there. And oftentimes, especially with children's books, it's much more difficult. It's hard to get that expression on paper in a way that an illustrator will understand fully what you're trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
For example, in my book, wrote a book, The Purple Caterpillar. And in that book, the whole book is about bullying and acceptance and diversity. And one of the things that happened is that even with Jan's daughter, she understood that, but kind of missed it on one frame where, I needed diversity in the classroom. We're not all the same anymore in this world. We're all different. And so, that was probably the only thing we ever really had to change
Yeah.
was that one. But I was insistent on that because that's the whole reason for the book. Is that without showing that on paper, then the words don't mean anything, because now you're interpreting the words differently as
Yes.
well. So that's why it's really important to know who you're collaborating with for that reason.
Definitely.
And that one change that you made, the first thing Veronica said is, "Oh, I so see that. That is so much more right than what she had drawn."
Yeah.
So once she went back and redrew it, then it was great.
Well, because it carries the theme throughout the entire book.
Right.
So, that's probably why it's really important to sit down with an illustrator. Like you said, Joseph, that's why I prefer to sit down with an illustrator so that they can understand exactly where I'm coming from.
Yes.
I've also learned a lot of things about illustrators.
Good and bad.
Joseph,
Good and bad.
be careful here. But anyway, one of the things I learned is I got to tell you a couple of stories.
Okay.
One illustrator I had hired for the same book, by the way, she was a student at one of the universities, and I'm not kidding, I'm not making any of this up. When I would meet with her, she would have the illustration, but she wouldn't have it finished. Like maybe the eyes weren't drawn in, or, because mine's a caterpillar, or maybe, there was some aspect of the caterpillar that wasn't finished, or the background wasn't finished. And I said, well, this is great, but I kind of would like to see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the next time we meet. Well, the next time we meet, she'd have the other illustration, but she hadn't finished the first
one. Yeah.
And then by the third one is the dog got a hold of it and ripped it up.
Oh my gosh.
And by the next one is my little brother spilt milk on it. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is like going back to grade school,
Right.
So I had to let her go. And then the other thing is I found a fantastic illustrator. And they were friends of mine, actually. I didn't even know she did that kind of thing. And she was doing a great job. And then one day he called me, and he was crying, and he says, James, can you come over? I need to talk to you. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, did something happen to her? And I get there, and I said, so, I was asking where his wife was, and he was saying, she ran off with my brother
Oh, no. God.
to Arizona. They had an affair. And I'm thinking, and all I'm thinking of is,
goodness.
there goes my illustrator.
Exactly.
No, I didn't say that, but I was thinking it.
Yes.
But so there are a lot of challenges sometimes.
Life gets in the way.
Right,
Right.
and
Life
finding
gets
that
in the way.
right
Yes.
person
Yes.
and making sure that they follow through. Obviously, you were very accomplished already, and you definitely have a career, and that was even before you and Dana got together for this project.
Right.
So that makes a big difference as well.
Well,
Definitely.
I'd like to thank Dana for his message that he's putting out, that girls and kids in general can grow up to be anything they want. I think back to,
Yes.
I have a nephew that when he was 10 years old, he only wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. And at the time I was 19, and I thought, well, that's great for you, but girls can never be astronauts, and as much as I would love to go to the moon, I'll never get to go. So, but now we can. And it's because you're getting that message out there. And the younger they are to learn that they can be anything, the better. Because
Absolutely.
then they can just shoot for the stars. And they don't have to settle for anything else.
Yeah.
They don't have to be homemakers and stay at home, and they can be anything they want. And I think that's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And I have a question for Joseph about illustration. I know from an author point of view, you always tend to want to get the whole storyline into the cover of the book because you want your pride and joy
Sure.
to be on the cover. You want everyone in the whole world to say, this is the most fabulous book ever. I want you to buy it and read it and share it with all of your friends. So I want the most fabulous cover art that's ever there. How do you deal with that when an author is like almost biting at your heels and saying, oh, this must be the most greatest, most fantastic cover art
Exactly.
ever?
Well, actually, I've recently dealt with that on more of a novel level, and that is true. The cover is the billboard, the skin, the advertisement for the actual book, and
Right.
and there's to me, you can say more with less. Just
Mhm.
like any great movie, in certain shots and good cinematography, let the mind fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But timing and using the right elements, color, mood, design choices on that cover to make it the most competitive as possible and true as possible to that story, honest to that story, I think is the best approach. You also have to consider what the book is competing with in that space on the bookshelf. Where is it going to be online? Where is it based on current trends and things like that? And that all has to be considered when illustrating that cover. As you can see on the Greta books, we decided to take a slightly different approach towards the book number 3 cover. It's much more simple, direct, and straight to the point, because people who have books 1 and 2, we wanted to show something from a different perspective and more simplistic, since they were familiar with that story. Also adding diversity, since we have 3 books, to the choices of the consumer who's going to purchase it.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of thought goes into what's going to be on that cover, and it's not always the best thing to have everything except for the kitchen sink thrown in, but depends on the book too.
Well, you guys are both pretty young.
Good ideas.
And so I'm pointing that out for a reason, because you probably both know Tanya Todd, or do you know Tanya?
Tanya Todd. Do you know Tanya Todd?
Say one more time.
Do you know Tanya Todd?
Dana.
She's an actress here in Las Vegas, and she's with the Henderson Writers Group. She also is on there.
I might have met her, possibly.
You probably did at the festival.
Yeah.
The reason the reason I'm talking about that is I've had other guests on as well when we've talked about this, and I think that we're in a state or an age now to where diversity is very important. And it's important to be able to put that out there for all children if we want our children to get along in this world. Right. And the thing is that one of the authors that was on was telling me, up until a few years ago, and I cannot remember her name right now, she was telling me that, that was a very difficult thing to do. Because if the characters weren't really white, then it was really hard to get a book out there in the publishing industry, especially with the big 5. So, it's up to people. Dana, you self-published, is that correct?
Correct.
So it's up to people like Dana to get out there and show that this is a diverse world, and we need to characterize the people in the book as such. You can't just have black, you can't just have white, you can't just have light skin. It's a diverse world, and the children need to understand it's okay that it's a diverse world. If you just have a book out there that's just got one color character, they're going to think that's the way society is, and it's not that way at all.
So you're saying Tanya gave you that perspective?
Well, she's starting to write, and in her writing, she wants to show more diversity in writing. Because even in novels in the past, there wasn't a lot of diversity even in novels. We've talked about that, Joyce, even with, in your book, because yours is based on memoir, even though the second and the third are fictional, they're still based on characters from your background.
And I have a Native American young girl in there. Yes.
But the point is that they weren't diverse, but that's because that's the way that story goes.
Right.
There are times when you don't have a choice.
Right.
But when you're writing, especially for children, it's important to keep that, in my opinion, it's important to keep that in mind. And that's why I'm really, I demand that really when it comes to what I'm doing. And it doesn't even matter if the characters are people or I have one story that's all animals.
Yeah.
There's diversity in animals as well. I don't know what's going on with this phone. I turn it off and it still rings. But anyway, the thing is that we have to keep that in mind in writing. And Dana, I hope that's what you do when you're writing. You keep that in mind when you're writing your stories.
Diversity specifically?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so in this case, my wife is white, and I'm African American, so our children are, biracial, and when with Shay as sort of an influence in this story, we just wanted to appeal to people universally, and I think Joseph's very mindful of when he's illustrating, just sort of the way his mind works. I love it. He just introduces different layers wherever possible when it comes to, ethnicity, skin color. If we're talking about animals, I mean, he just has just an eclectic range of whatever. So I think it's very important just to, make sure that kids are seeing somebody out there who looks like them. It always doesn't always have to be the hero, or the protagonist, but I think it's important to be inclusive and, to let kids know that, you know, um, whatever their situation is, there are other characters out there that have a similar situation. I think it's very important.
And I think that's where the illustrator is really important, because it's hard to convey that in words sometimes. I mean, we know in our mind when we're writing the story what we want, but you're not writing that in there. You're not writing that diversity into the book as far as the kid's color or, their background or their heritage. That's not in that character's, in the book. Right. So you have to depend on the illustrator to pull that off, to make sure that it comes across that way, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we can name kids things, but nowadays names don't mean anything either. Because,
Right.
that's the other great thing about diversity is everyone's being named everything. So,
Yeah.
including apple and orange and,
Yeah, exactly.
so,
Violet.
and violet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really up to the illustrator to help convey that story, I think.
Oh, no, I totally agree as well. When we started the very first Greta book, every little detail as far as how this is going to be perceived and what audience is going to read it, hopefully the most global audience as possible, we tailored the visuals of it to be appealing to everybody.
Mhm.
So every little nuance through there, we would have conversations back and forth. We're like, should we do this way and possibly narrow our audience, or should we do it this way and still stay true to the story and widen our audience? And how is this particular audience going to perceive our product? How is this particular audience going to perceive our product? And we pretty much felt that we tailored it to cater to everyone. And the results of that, I think, is it held true, because if you look at the audience that actually reads the Greta books, or the schools that have us visit the schools and do demos and things like that, I think it's universally accepted because of both the writing and the universal imagery.
Oh, and one of the things I wanted to bring up is we had two authors on who wrote the book Surgery Day, and it was about kids and what they experience or envision in their mind when they're going to have surgery. And one of the things they did is they took their book and they would actually go to schools and do readings.
Yep.
Or they would go into a hospital, into a kid's room who's sick, and read the book to them. And what was fascinating is they listened to the children, by the way. What was fascinating is they'd say, that character wouldn't be named that, or that character wouldn't be a duck. It would be a giraffe. And they were thinking, that makes more sense. And so they actually formulated their book based on reading this to other children. In other words, it took them a long time to really finalize that final book, to make it something they could publish and put out there. And it was something that was appealing to all children because they did that.
Yeah.
So do you ever get feedback when you're out there doing readings on the book, Dana?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you may have said this earlier, but I mean, the children's audience is the most pure audience, man. It's the most, they're very unforgiving, and they participate in a way that grown-ups never do. They're very observant. They pay attention to things that you just, you're like, I've flipped through the book 1,000 times, and then I read it to a child for the first time, and they notice something that I've never noticed. It's just
right.
I specifically remember we were just talking about the naming of animals. Joseph and I were in a classroom one time reading to these kids, and the line is, I'll meet an ostrich named Jamal. And there happened to be a kid named Jamal standing there in the classroom, and he just lit up, man. He was so excited. And then everybody around him they're like, yeah, Jamal. Because there was a character, he's an ostrich riding a skateboard, standing on top of an ostrich and striped legs. And it was totally random. But he made an association. It made him feel great. It made the rest of the kids feel great. It's just, who knew? But it just happened to work with the rhyme scheme. And, it's just, but little things like that, that audience is just wonderful. And I think there were times too that when we went and read, we would come back and tailor things on a second, third book based upon the things that the kids had done or said or reacted to.
Hmm. We had Two Barris Medina on, and he wrote the book Itchy the Goat.
Yes.
And he's a great storyteller. And when he goes into the schools, he said the same thing happens, that he said these kids come up with things to ask questions about that you couldn't even fathom, before you went to the classroom. And he said they really get engrossed in what you're telling them. He said to the point that even with his book, in the back it listed the illustrator and the author, and they would question him about that. Like, tell us more about who that is. And it's like, that's not the story. But, they're so inquisitive. They want to know everything and every detail. And what does that mean in the picture? And why is that there? So they see more than we do. Even with your illustrations, Joseph, I can guarantee you they're picking up things you didn't know you put in there.
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's a cool thing to see it through kids' eyes.
Yeah.
Yep. And one of the things that Dana and I, one of the things that we formatted into our school presentations is like actual dynamic input from the kids. So we get up there with a blank board and we say, okay, who wants to design a children's book illustration? And like 500 kids' hands
Wow.
go up.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, you in the back over there, what is your idea? And they go, elephant. Okay, how about you over there, the girl in the front? She's like, wings. And how about you over here? Skis. So I'm like, okay.
An elephant with wings and skis.
Elephant on
With
skis.
wings
Going,
and
yeah,
skis.
and we draw it for them and show them the importance of just really having solid ideas and writing behind the actual image, which we demo for them. So that participation in showing them that process behind the scenes, we like to do that for the kids and really just like light bulbs go off in their head. Yeah, because of that.
Yeah, it probably encourages them to
Sure.
try and do the same thing.
Oh, totally. And work with each other, teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure.
And you can't fool little kids either.
No.
I used to work at a daycare center. I had 21 2-year-olds.
Oh,
And I read this story, and I'm trying to think whether it was an elephant or exactly what it was. Anyhow, I had to climb a ladder, but he was afraid to because he was afraid of heights. Later on in the book, he's flying an airplane. The kids literally said no. They didn't like it. He can't climb a ladder. He's not going to fly an airplane. If he's afraid of heights, he's afraid of heights. So they didn't like the book at all.
oh no.
Yeah. So you got to watch that. Some of them are pretty sharp.
All right. Well, I have a question for you, Dana, and I'm sure you've collaborated with Joseph on my next question. Do you have plans of taking this to another level? Like, for instance, I know you had Lisa Loeb do the audio book for you. Have you given any thought to maybe creating a cartoon out of this character or some kind of children's movie from this character? Finding Waldo or Dora, or what have you put any thought into that?
Yeah, absolutely. We much thought, and we definitely, for us, I think the sky's the limit. I think we would love to, if Disney wants to sit down and have a conversation about how to work, Greta into their suite of characters. Not a princess. She's not a princess, but a character. Yeah, we're wide open to that. We started some projects working with animators and things, for any number of reasons have kind of, just sat on the back burner for a little bit, but we definitely hope to keep moving forward on all that. And yeah, if an animated series would be amazing. I mean, I think any additional format to kind of keep the message moving forward, we're wide open to.
I can see the itinerary now. So Monday morning, they're marking it off. Okay, get up, have coffee, meet with Disney Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who does those
Pixar.
things?
The And I Thought girls.
Awesome.
The And I Thought ladies do that.
There you go.
We had these young ladies on who wrote poetry, and they didn't know how to get the poetry out there, and so they came up with these concepts. Did you listen to that show? And
Not yet.
well, what they did is they so much energy. They
Yes.
first thought, well, what can we do? Who reads poetry, and how are we going to get this into the hands of people? So they thought, okay, let's start our own magazine. So they did. They started 2.
Oh.
And then from there, after that, the ones like okay, this is a lot. And the other one's going, okay, now what can we do next? And they're going, what do you mean? What the Jada's going, what do you mean? What are we going to do next? And well, Nona's going, okay, we have the magazine, so let's do our own YouTube channel. Okay. So then they do the YouTube channel. Okay, now what? What do you mean now what? Now they have a show on Amazon. They're going into the third season.
Yeah.
Okay, now what? Let's go to Europe and interview people. And it's like they never stop.
Yeah.
They're always finding ways to get out there and get their product into the hands of someone. And their theory is that if you do this enough, you will develop a following and you will accomplish what you're trying to do. And they certainly are. So, all right, Joseph, when it comes to other books, because you mentioned you do book covers as well.
Yes, illustration, commission projects, things like that.
Have you ever had someone come back and say, "This isn't really what I was looking for"?
Certainly. And okay. My whole process is to really streamline it and minimize any unnecessary rework. So the way my approach as far as building an illustration, I like to share daily progress with the actual author or publisher. So I would start it off with reading the script, doing thumbnails, sharing them back and forth, then proceeding to the next step after that. Hopefully, by the very end, it's something that really matches and tells their story the way it should be told. However, if it's a very large publisher, there is also marketing departments as well. After the main art director approves it, once marketing gets hold of it, it could take a different turn, which has nothing to do with the actual quality of the work, but overall more of like company and publisher direction.
Who they're trying to market to.
Exactly. So those sort of things, it's totally understandable, and I make my tweaks on top of that and just hone in on the actual image and release it as a final product to them.
How many changes do you allow from an author or a company, or there is no set limit?
There's really no limit. However, when you're dealing with smaller clients, they could have a higher percentage of various adjustments and things like that, only because of maybe the mileage might be less, so they might not know where they're navigating to yet, but still I'm there for them. So it's pretty much unlimited, but kind of unlimited.
Yeah, because you have to
I'm
set a
so much
limit or
time.
you'll be
Right,
going
exactly.
over and over and over and over
Right.
again.
Right, because that all factors into, of course, budget as well. With the bigger players out there, I think they have a crystal clear understanding as far as what it really takes to produce an actual image, and they have that deadline as well. So it's like, okay, we can't request many changes from Joseph just because no reason. We have a deadline to hit, and we want to get the best possible product by this particular date. So we work together, figuring out which will be the optimal changes to produce the best imagery for that project.
And one of the things you just said is important is that deadline, because as a self-published author, you can have a deadline, but you can go past that. It's not etched in stone.
Totally.
But when you're dealing with a traditional publisher, they have a deadline, and you do have to reach that deadline.
Yes.
And that's the one thing that's changed in the publishing industry. When I started out, even though you were self-published, if you were self-published, you still had deadlines you had to meet because you dealt with graphic artists, and the graphic artists, you were dealing with the printer, and you were in basically in line, a certain order, and you had to meet that deadline, or guess what? You're waiting until next year to get your book out there.
Yeah.
So that's what's changed in the market today as a self-publishers, is that you're not under the same eye that you were, maybe even 10 years ago. It's a different dynamic with the technology the way it is in digital publishing. You can change anything any day that you want, any hour of the day, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just upload a new file.
Exactly.
So that's what's different with publishing today. You couldn't do that a few years ago.
Exactly. And also our current tool set with artists that we have at our fingertips, it allows us to create these changes and upload faster to the client as well. So our tool set developed along those lines, so it's more.
Well, it's
adjustable
kind of
that
like
way
what
as
you
well,
and
too.
Dana did. You
Exactly.
emailed each other with the changes, and so you could
Exactly.
see it
Yes.
literally within seconds
Oh, yeah.
from the moment you send it
Mhm.
to him.
Mhm.
He can call you, or he can email you back. How about this, or how about that?
Exactly.
It's a different world today.
Yeah.
I'm curious about one thing with you.
Sure.
When it comes to video games, how did you go from what's different with video games as opposed to illustrating a book? Because it's kind of like writing a cartoon in a way, or
Yeah.
illustrating a cartoon, I
Certainly.
should say.
Yes, definitely. So my role in the video game industry was more of conceptual designer, character designer, environment designer, modeling and things like that. So as far as comparing to a book, the closest thing I can compare it to is the choose your own adventure book. So basically with video games, it's interactive and it's driven by choices of the player. Choices, consequences, prizes, things like that. It's like not as linear. There's many different paths one can take to achieve a particular goal. Also the social mechanism of it, of having like a game where you can play with many different players, at one time online, that whole, social interaction, which it's different for a book. I think it's more of a sort of solo sort of thing,
Right.
you reading a book linear down that path. So it's a very different thing. As far as on the illustrator side, it's a slower pace for me, at least my work pace as far as doing stuff for books. I put a little more, I guess, thought to building illustration for a book. A book opposed to the stuff for video games. Video games, there is a lot of thought and things put behind that, but it's for like different reasons, because you have like hardware limitation, you have like certain space as far as allocated memory for a particular video game, the competition in video games, interactivity. You could swing your character all around, and you have to be able to see a 360 view of the world with other characters. There's just so many multiple variations of scenarios that can happen in video games, and it's built from the ground up from, I think, a whole different in reason from a book.
Obviously, your book is much easier.
Right.
From everything you just said.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like you use algorithms in doing the video games much more. Like you were saying, the book cover is lineal.
Right.
Okay.
Static image, and it's seen from pretty much a perspective, guided perspective. Walking the viewer through, flipping the pages. Oh, excuse me, or swiping through the pages,
Mhm.
such as like an ebook. But yeah, these video games nowadays, it's just an immersive world.
Mhm.
So is a book, though, too. At the same time, if you compare some movies with books, a lot of people say, "Oh, the book was better."
Yeah.
Even like with
Mhm.
games and movies, or games and books, it's like a lot of times it does go back to, "Oh, the book was better." So I believe at the end of the day, if you compare a book to a video game, I think they should have equal levels of entertainment, even though you're comparing pages to a pixel-based experience.
Right.
They should both be that appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said too about most of the time people will say the book was better, but there are occasions where they like the movie a little better. But that's an interesting dynamic in itself, in that books sell movies sell books.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that video games sell book. I don't know how that's going, because I guess there are some.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Then there's also the art of like many different video game projects out there. There's the art of this project, the art of that project.
And
There's
video
also
games certainly sell movies, because I know that there's a lot of video
licensing,
games created
sure.
from a movie.
Exactly. Yes.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
Totally.
Isn't Game of Thrones? I think that's a video
Right.
game.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing. All right, what's up next for you, Dana? What are you up to now? What are you writing now?
Say one more time.
What are you working on now?
What am I writing now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I just want to make sure I heard that. So there's the day-to-day advertising writing that keeps the lights on, and then Joseph and I, as you know, and then Joseph and I have a couple of, like I mentioned earlier, a couple of other spin-offs on Greta that are they're more dedicated to specific adventures, and then a couple of other things that might move away from the Greta franchise and introduce some male characters.
Okay. All right.
Sounds good.
Where can we find your work? Where can you learn more about Dana?
Oh, you can find more about me. Well, I have several different sites, but for the Greta work, gogogreta.com. That's GOGOGRETA.com. You can find the books also on Lulu, the Lulu publishing site. And then I have my personal work, my advertising creative work can be found at TeamQuiver.com. That's teamquiver.com. I do photography. You can find some of my photography at kingwoodphotographer.com. And, so just creativity is just sort of what drives me. So you could find different things in different places.
So if they Googled Dana Satterwhite, they're going to find a lot.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right.
Wow.
And Joseph, where can we learn more about you and your work?
Okay, so my online presence, you could find me at josephwatsonart.com,
Okay.
JOSEPH, watsonart.com. Or you could follow that hashtag, josephwatsonart. You could see tons of my stuff. Also, my gallery, which is down in the Arts Factory off of Main in Charleston. We showcase a lot of painting mentor, up-and-coming artists, as well as host other artist shows there. And yeah, that's down in the Arts District.
Okay.
And that's pretty much where you can see most of my stuff. Unless you're out and about the city, you could see a lot of my stuff around as well.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, the Zappos headquarters, mural, stuff in West Las Vegas, like mural projects, banner projects, things like that. New things coming up as well. So, yeah.
All right, Joyce, where
Wow.
can we learn about your work?
Not as many places as these two guys, I can tell you that. Certainly at linesoflistening.com, and Lines of Listening is the name of my first book. Also, you can find my books on Amazon. I also maintain a health and wellness blog since I'm a registered nurse, and that's linesoflisteningblog.wordpress.com.
Okay, and Jan?
You can go to aspectsofwriting.com and find out a little bit about me, and Amazon and janetcorsi.com.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank my guests, Dana Satterwhite and Joseph Watson, along with my co-host for today, Joyce Katchenberger and Janet Corsi. To find links to our show, just go to aspectsofwriting.com. There you'll find links to our video and the archived shows. The shows are archived on iHeartRadio, iTunes. AM/FM 24/7 is the company that syndicates the show, and they archive it there as well. We're on Roku TV. I think we're now on Amazon as well, in addition to YouTube, and we have 14 terrestrial stations. So just go to aspectsofwriting.com to learn more about the show. So until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you, Joseph, for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
show, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.